The brain behind the behavior. Understanding the impact of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. The information in these slides may be disturbing to some staff, given people's experience with trauma. If you become upset by this content, please seek assistance from a trusted colleague, your direct administrator, or the Employee Assistance Program Business Health Services by calling 1-800-327-2251 or log into your Business Health Services portal. The learning objectives for this module are to learn what trauma and adverse childhood experiences are, to familiarize yourself with the statistic of ACEs, and to learn the impact of ACEs on brain development, learning, and social interactions. This module contains 3 parts. What is trauma? Trauma is an inescapable, stressful event that overwhelms an individual's coping mechanisms and triggers the fear response system in our brains and bodies. The fear response is hardwired into our brains to keep us alive. It is a physical response to danger. Students view their life through a trauma lens. Traumatic events can have a lasting impact. Trauma can have a lasting impact on a person because some students will continue to organize their life as if the trauma were still going on, even if it's not. In these cases, every new encounter or event is contaminated by the past. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, conducted in 1997, used data from over 17,000 adults who had health insurance through Kaiser Permanente, a large HMO. The findings from this study suggest that certain childhood experiences or traumas are major risk factors for the leading causes of illness and death, as well as a poor quality of life. Of the 17,000 participants, 44% reported suffering sexual, physical, or psychological abuse as children, and 12.5% reported domestic violence in the home. The original study asked participants to indicate whether they had experienced any of the 9 types of trauma listed below. Each type counted as 1 point. Emotional neglect, emotional abuse, physical neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, parent separation, divorce, or loss, having a household member abuse substances, having a household member have mental illness, or incarceration of a family member. New research indicates that the following 5 types of trauma are also considered to be ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences: poverty, social isolation, community violence, bullying, and parental verbal aggression. Adverse childhood experiences are common among the general population, and therefore among our students. 2/3 of the general population have at least 1 ACE, and 1 in 8, or 12.5%, of the general population have experienced 4 or more ACEs. Why is this information important? ACEs have a dose-response relationship. 4 or more ACEs lead to increased risk of 2 times more likely to smoke, 7 times more likely to become an alcoholic, 10 times more likely to inject street drugs, and 32 times more likely to have behavioral problems in school. ACEs in any category increase the likelihood of a suicide attempt by 2 to 5 times. Individuals with 6 or more ACEs are more than 24 times more likely to attempt suicide. Exposure to one type of violence can double the risk of others. If a student experienced an assault in the past year, This is correlated with a 2.7 times greater likelihood of a sexual victimization and almost a 3 times greater likelihood of being abused or maltreated by a caretaker. ACEs in any category result in a higher prevalence of depression, anxiety, substance abuse, eating disorders, psychosis, personality disorders, and diminished cognitive functioning because the student goes into survival mode. When students are in survival mode, the limbic system in their brain has taken over, and fear and anger become their focus. Limbic system structures, including the amygdala, are involved in many of our emotions and motivations, particularly those that are related to survival. When the limbic system is in charge, higher order brain functions from the frontal lobe and the hippocampus required for learning are temporarily shut down. Students in survival mode are unavailable to learn. The impact of trauma is more global on children than adults. Toxic stress from significant and prolonged trauma elicits a persistent fear response and overwhelms the brain and body's ability to cope. Toxic stress reduces brain volume by as much as 20%. The brain image on the left is from a child who was not neglected, while the brain image on the right is from a child who had severe neglect. When students experience multiple ACEs, their brain and nervous systems change. In survival mode, students have significant difficulty talking about their behavior and feelings. They need time to calm down before they can talk because it's difficult to talk to an amygdala. Following abuse and neglect, the world is experienced with a different nervous system. The type and timing of ACEs matters. Nurturance at age 4 predicts brain volume at age 14. Maternal stress in infancy can change genetic expression and show up at age 15 in behavioral problems. Parental verbal abuse changes language processing and can lower the verbal IQ. Physical abuse correlates with later drug and alcohol abuse and reduces brain volume of the cerebral cortex. The cerebral cortex plays a key role in memory, attention, perception, cognition, awareness, thought, and language. Signs of developmental trauma can include emotional dysregulation, disrupted attachment to adults and peers, and a diminished capacity to control impulses and emotions. Overwhelming emotions from the survival brain trumps rational thought. Reactions can include extreme helplessness, confusion, withdrawal, rage, and self-soothing repetitive behavior. As educators and those working with children, we need to change how we respond. Students with significant trauma are clinically, neurobiologically, and genetically distinct from non-abused children. Therefore, we must stop emphasizing behavioral control over the restoration of underlying brain abnormalities. We need to shift our thinking from what is wrong with you to what has happened to you. When we believe students have complete control over their negative behavior, we tend to be angry and want to punish them. But when we believe that their negative behavior is the result of underlying trauma and resulting brain changes, we tend to want to help them and teach them better coping strategies. Challenging behavior is often about something else. We need to investigate the underlying source of the behavior, respect students' dignity, and provide private conversations and quiet and neutral behavioral redirections. We need to take time to work through the problems together And remember Q-tip, quit taking it personally, because more than likely, their behavior is not about us. The 4 R's of a trauma-responsive educator is to realize the impact of trauma on all aspects of the school experience, recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma in students, families, and staff, respond by integrating knowledge about trauma into policies and practices, and resist re-traumatization by recognizing how classroom and school practices can trigger trauma histories.